This is Chapter 2, Part 3. Chapter 2, the Aegean Civilization, the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, and the Greeks of the Archaic Age. As we left off with Part 2 of this chapter, we were talking about the Archaic Greeks. The Archaic Age ran from about 800 to 479 BCE. We've already talked a bit about Sparta and Athens, and I'd like to move now to the emergence of the Greek genius, the mastery of form. During the Archaic Age, Greeks have explored the natural world. They probed human existence, and they celebrated life by means of literature, philosophy, and art. These cultural accomplishments, like those of the older Near Eastern civilizations, arose basically from their religious beliefs and practices, those which played a central role in Greek life and history. In fact, the Greeks believed that creativity itself was a divine gift from the Muses, the 9 goddesses of artistic inspiration. Guided by the Muses, they created of art, literature, and theater, each with universal appeal. Critical to the Greek experience was a quest for understanding the independent religious explanations. Now, again, religion was foremost here. There were 2 main forms of worshiping during this period. The Olympians, who dwelled in the sky or on the mountaintops and were associated with Homeric heroes and the aristocracy. And then there were the Clonethians, which were the deities that lived underground and were associated with peasant life, the seasons and the cycles of nature, and fertility. This next slide shows the 12 Olympians. Well, actually, it only shows part. The following slide will show the rest. Now, on this comparison chart, I have both the Greek and Roman because eventually we will be moving into Rome, and the Romans worshipped the same gods but with different names. So looking in the left column, you can see the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Zeus ruled the air, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. Hestia was the sister of the 3 main ones, and Hera was Zeus's wife. Now on the next page, we can see the rest of the Olympians. Athena was the daughter of Zeus. She was in charge of war and wisdom. If you've seen Clash of the Titans, she's the one with the owl. Apollo, the son of Zeus, he's the messenger god. Aphrodite is the daughter of Zeus and goddess of love. And I apologize. Apollo was the musician. Hermes is the god of messaging, who's also a son of Zeus. Artemis is Apollo's twin sister, which makes her the daughter of Zeus. She is goddess of the hunt, goddess of the moon. Hephaestus is the son of Hera and the god of fire. Now these are the main 12 Olympians, and they are the ones that we get their stories. And if you watch something like Perseus in the Olympians, you can learn more of these stories that are actually based off Homer's The Odyssey. Now, we're going to talk about Homer in just a second, but first I want to return back to the Chthonians, because these are ones that we probably don't know a lot about. We've gotten the stories from Homer about the Olympians, and they've become part of our culture. The Chthonian gods and goddesses were not ones that we knew. They were probably derived from ancient earth and harvest deities, and at first they were worshipped only by the lower levels of society. But as ordinary people grew in influence, Chthonian rituals spread and were integrated into civic rituals. Chthonian worship was open only to initiates who were sworn to silence, hence the mystery cults, keeping silence. Mystery cults constituted the personal element in Greek religion. These practices originally evoked the powers of the earth to ensure successful planting and a bountiful harvest. The Mediterranean triad of crops, olives, grapes, and cereal grains, led to two major cults emphasizing grains and grapes, the source of bread and wine. Now, these eventually led to other minor gods and goddesses who are connected through stories to the Olympians. And again, where do we get those stories? Well, most of those stories about the gods and goddesses, whether it be the major ones or the minor ones, come from Greek literature and epic poetry. Now, during the Archaic Age, the Greeks produced some of the greatest literature of Western heritage, with stories as adventurous, amusing, and heartfelt as they are sophisticated and structured, and rich with many of the values we still hold today. Epic poetry specifically was said to have been invented by Homer, a bard or poet who sang his verses while accompanying himself on a stringed instrument. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, Homer sang of the events before, during, and after the Trojan War, stories that had circulated among the Greeks since the fall of Mycenae. He entertained an aristocratic audience eager to identify with the Mycenaean past. For many years, his poems were transmitted orally by other bards and probably did not exist in written form at all until at least the 6th century BCE. Homer's authorship, and indeed his very existence, are established solely by tradition. In fact, many people consider Homer to just be a legendary Greek, possibly even mythical. Ancient Greeks generally believed that Homer was a historic individual, but most scholars are skeptical today. There's no reliable biographical information handed down from classical antiquity, and the poems themselves seem to represent the culmination of many centuries of oral storytelling and a well-developed formulaic system of poetic composition. According to Martin West, Homer is not the name of a historical poet, but a fictitious or constructed name. The date of Homer's existence was controversial in antiquity and is no less so today. Some have said Homer lived around 850 BCE, but other ancient sources give dates much closer to the supposed time of the Trojan War. The date of the Trojan War was given as 1194 to 1184 BCE by ancient historians. For modern scholarship, the date of Homer refers to the date of the poem's conception as much as to the lifetime of the individual. The scholarly consensus is that the Iliad and the Odyssey date from the extreme end of the 9th century BCE, or the 8th, the Iliad being anterior to the Odyssey perhaps by some decades. Those who believe that Homeric poems developed gradually over a long period of time generally give a later date for the poems. And Gregory Nagy actually argues that they only become fixed text in the 6th century. Now that's when they're down, supposedly. Now another form of poetry or of literature that becomes popular in this time period is that of lyric poetry. Verses sung to the music of a lyre, stringed instrument, are called lyric poetry, and they became the dominant literary expression in the late Archaic Age, and lyric verses have dominated Western poetry ever since. Lyric poetry, which originated later than the epic, expresses an author's personal private thoughts through the muse, who is credited with the inspiration. The shift from lyric poetry in the 6th century BCE coincides with changes in the polis, where the rising democratic spirit encouraged a variety of voices. Of the several types of lyric poetry, monody, or the solo lyric, became the most influential in archaic Greece. Poets of this type achieved relative simplicity by using a single line of verse or repeating the short stanza pattern, whereas the Homeric epics survive relatively intact. The solo lyrics exist in fragments. For example, Sappho's 9 books of verse only have one complete poem and several dozen fragments that have survived, and the music has completely been lost. The ancients, however, regarded Sappho about 600 BCE, is the greatest of lyrics. The philosopher Plato held her as the 10th muse. In a short lyric he dedicated to her. A truly original writer, Sappho apparently owed no debt to Homer or any other poet. Her work is addressed to a small circle of aristocratic women friends on her native island of Lesbos in the Aegean. She was deeply personal in her interests, writing chiefly about herself, her friends, and their feelings for one another. Sappho pioneered the personal lyric genre. Their literary style is direct and concrete, as seen in this latest example in your book. The emotional intensity is remarkable. Quote, "My tongue sticks to my dry mouth, my aching ears roar, chill sweat floods down my body." No wonder that for centuries Sappho was quoted and imitated by other poets. Sappho lived among young girls to whom she taught the art of writing poetry, and it was women whom she loved. Now, another important humanist tradition from the time period is that of philosophy. The mental attitudes that exemplified the democratic challenge to established authority in the archaic age also brought forth thinkers who questioned the power and ultimately the existence of the gods. Just as the Democrats constructed a human-centered state, so did the philosophers conceive of a world where natural processes operated and human minds could grasp them. These Greek thinkers invented natural philosophy, a term that encompasses the fields we now call both philosophy and science. The close connection between philosophy and science persisted until the Newtonian revolution of the 17th century CE, Common Era. From that point on, science simply demonstrated what happened in nature without speculating about its purpose. The Greeks asked both how and why. Three famous philosophers from this time period are on your screen. Thales, the first philosopher and founder of philosophic materialism. Pythagoras, founder of the philosophic idealism. And Euclid, the first for dialectical reasoning and belief in the continual flux. The Greeks were also, in this time period, creating form in sculpture, architecture, and in base construction. In architecture, they became famous for the post-beam triangle construction and the Doric columns seen on the next slide. Now, like the art of Mesopotamia in Egypt, Greek sculpture was rooted in religious practices and beliefs. The Greek sculptors fashioned images of the gods and goddesses to be used in temples either as objects of worship or as decorations for the pediments and friezes. Of greater importance for the development of Greek sculpture were the chorei, freestanding statues of youth and maidens, respectively. Before 600 BCE, these sculptures had evolved from images of gods into statues of dead heroes, and finally into memorials of ordinary people, say civic notables or victorious athletes. What made the archaic statues of youth and maidens so different from Egyptian Mesopotamian art was the Greek delight in the splendor of the human body and the representation of the human form. The Greeks rejected the sacred approach of the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, which stressed conventional static poses and formal gestures. Instead, Greek sculptures created athletic, muscular males and lively, robust maidens. Health and beauty were as important for religious purposes. The first archaic statues of youth owed much to the Egyptian tradition, but gradually, Greek sculpture broke free of its origins. Like everything else, the art of ancient Greek evolved, but the legacy that they have left us is important to remember. Archaic Greeks gave rise to the humanities as we know it today, to a creative energy, and to belief in the basic value of human achievement.